Hello, I'm here with Spiro Liacos. Spiro, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about yourself?
Hi everyone, Spiro is my name. I am a teacher, a science teacher and a maths teacher and PE teacher, but I also have a big interest in Christianity. I'm a Christian, I believe in God, and Alexander asked me just over to just discuss how those two things are related to each other.
All right. So the big question today that I've got is, how does theology help us to view science, mathematics and order in the natural world? So I'm going to ask you a series of questions in which your answers to them will build up to help us gain a deeper understanding of that big question. All right, Spiro, the first question I have for you is, does the Christian belief regarding creation contradict to the modern scientific view of the Big Bang Theory?
Well, I think it does contradict the scientific notion of how everything was created in terms of Big Bang, star formation, how the Earth was formed, is completely at odds with what it says in Genesis, in the first book of the Bible. But I don't really have a problem with that. Certain stories shouldn't necessarily be read as literal truths. This is exactly the way it happened. But I don't think it's a problem because the Bible was written at a certain time for a certain audience, and it still has a lot to teach us. But the Christianity is not based on what the first chapter of Genesis says regarding the formation of the earth. Christianity is based on Jesus Christ. So as Christians, we believe that it's Jesus who is the head of Christianity, the Christian church of Christians. It's Jesus whose life and death and resurrection have everything to do with Christianity. So we can, as long as we believe in Jesus Christ, then if there are certain other stories in the Bible that maybe don't make as much sense now that we have all this scientific information about the Big Bang Theory and star formation and gravity and how the Earth forms, then to me it's not an issue. Christianity is centered on Christ, hence the name. So that's what we really believe, and that's the central tenet of what we believe. We believe that the apostles saw Christ, lived with Christ, heard his teachings, and Christ said all these amazing things, and they believed it, and then they were prepared to go to their deaths speaking about Christ and saying, we have seen him, we lived with him, we saw him die, we saw him resurrect. They then went and preached that to whoever they could. So that's really the central tenet of Christianity. It's all about Christ. If there's a few little stories that don't exactly gel, to me, it's not all that important.
All right, Spiro, the next question I have for you is orthodoxy contrary to modern science and scientific theory? How should Orthodox Christians approach science?
Orthodox Christians should embrace science. Science is fantastic. Science helps us understand the world that God created, and it also just improves our lives. We get new medicines, we get technology that helps improve our lives, better methods of farming, for example, to provide more food for people so you don't get starvation ever. Unfortunately, we still do get, in some places, people do suffer from starvation and malnutrition and so on. But a whole lot more people are alive now and able to live now because of what science has brought us. And science also allows us to appreciate God's creation even more. We see just how our bodies work, how the natural world works, and it's just a whole lot better. We can live longer, we can live more fulfilled, we can live more comfortably, we can have better relationships with others, as long as we use whatever technology and science properly for the greater good. Then we should definitely embrace science.
Thank you, Spiro. The next question I have for you is, what is beyond the life on Earth throughout the vastness of the universe? Are humans the main point of significance in the universe?
It's hard to say what significance is, whether we're the most significant, but in all of the galaxy, in all of the universe, humans who are part of the universe and who are part of the natural world, we are the only beings that can actually study the very same universe that we're a part of. So it's quite incredible to think that in all these trillions of galaxies, with each made of billions of stars or whatever, that we can sit here on Earth and just contemplate and say, how does it all work? What's out there? What's in our brains? How does our body work and the natural world? But yeah, we are definitely significant, and we are important. We're important to God, and we should be important to each other. One of the Voyager spacecraft that was sent out to the large outer planets back in 1977, and it took like a decade and a half to get out to Neptune, kind of thing. And at one point they turned it around and took a photo towards the Earth, and they took a photo of the Earth through the rings of Saturn. So this spacecraft had gone beyond Saturn and was pointed back towards Saturn, and behind Saturn was the Earth, and it was just this tiny little speck on the photo. And in this vastness of the universe, everything that we know, everyone that we've ever known, every human that's ever existed, plants, animals that we know has existed, was on this tiny little speck of rock in the middle of space going around this sun.
Wow. And
you just go, wow, that's incredible that there's no humans out there, there's no thought out there, but we're here contemplating it all. I find it pretty fascinating, yeah.
Wow, thank you for that. Next question is, do patterns in nature have significance, such as in wildlife, the constellations of the stars, symmetries, and other patterns?
Yeah, they do have significance, because for me, nature is just this beautiful kind of poetry. We might read a poem and we love the words that the poem is written in, and we enjoy that kind of thing. But nature itself is a poem. The beauty in the patterns that we see really brings us closer to God, I think. Not necessarily every pattern that we see, but it's just beautiful for me. So nature for me is, some people they might go on some kind of poetry reading and they hear the words being spoken, or they just read it themselves and they go, isn't that a beautiful piece of poetry? Or they'll read a novel that moves them in some way, or they might go to an art gallery and see some beautiful painting, go, oh gee, the artist has done this, isn't this wonderful? But nature itself for me is wonderful, and like poetry, it's just beautiful to see. So for example, you would have studied in chemistry classes the electron shells, the way they build up in patterns. That's just beautiful to me when I see that, and when I realise how they came to discover how these electron shells work, and that hydrogen's only got the one electron in the one shell, helium's got two electrons in that first shell, then no more electrons fit in the first shell of an atom, so they have to go into the second shell. So you've got lithium with 3, beryllium with 4 electrons altogether, 2 in the first shell, 2 in the second shell, and so on. And the way the pattern all builds up, and that we were able to find the pattern, it's still, for me, it's beautiful and it's poetic in the way it works. For example, you've got carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and fluorine, and then neon, 5 elements that are in a row, all in a row in the second period of the periodic table. And carbon's got 4 electrons in its outer shell, nitrogen 5, oxygen 6, fluorine 7, neon 8. And that's just a beautiful pattern. But then when those elements react with hydrogen, you get another pattern, because elements prefer to chemically react with other atoms such that they have 8 electrons in their outer shell. So the hydride of carbon is CH4, And then the hydride of nitrogen is NH3, oxygen is H2O, the hydride of fluorine is HF, and neon doesn't chemically react at all with hydrogen. And they're the 5 in a row on the periodic table. So you get a 4-to-1 ratio of hydrogen to carbon atoms in CH4, a 3-to-1 in NH3, a 2-to-1 in H2O, a 1-to-1 in HF, and a 0-to-1, if you look at it mathematically, with neon, because neon doesn't chemically react at all. And when I see that, I go, this is poetry. To me, this is the person who first kind of discovered that, or the teams of scientists that discovered that, they're dealing with facts, but to me, it's still a form of poetry. It's just beautiful. You go, this is not just an amazing discovery of nature, but nature itself is beautiful, and these people have captured the poetry of nature with their discovery and be able to express it in terms of electron shells and bonding. I think it's wonderful. There's other patterns in how the Earth goes around the sun, and then Mars also goes around the sun, and the same gravity that affects the Earth and makes the Earth go around the sun works in the same way, or gravity works in the same way on Mars, but because Mars is further, the gravity is a little bit weaker when it comes to the sun, so it doesn't go around the sun as quickly as Earth does. But it's all been, they've sort of discovered that there are patterns in the way it works, and there's a simple formulas that kind of link it all together. Again, I just see a lot of those things as poetic. Isaac Newton first came up with his theory of gravity. He was able to say, there's that story of the apple falling on Newton's head, and he says, and the story is that, oh, look, he discovered gravity, things get pulled downwards because of gravity. Of course, they already knew that gravity existed. They knew that if you let something go, it would fall. His really big insight was that the gravity that pulls an apple towards the Earth is the same as the gravity, not in size, but it's the same nature.
Yeah.
The same nature that holds the moon in its orbit around the Earth. And because the moon's further away, the size of the gravity per kilogram is less, but it's the same thing. So Isaac Newton discovered not just some of the laws of nature, as did so many other scientists, but every time you discover something new, you just think, this is just another beautiful verse in this grand poem, this beautiful poem that God has created. That's how I see this link between Christianity, Orthodox Christianity, and science.
All right, the next question I have for you is, what evidence is there in nature of a creator or designer? Are there any facts, events, observances, or any evidences in nature that allude to God?
Well, I think everything in nature points to the existence of God. That's how I see it. Although we have scientific explanations for gravity, for example, now, that just allows us to appreciate God's power and God's magnificence in designing this whole sort of universe that we're in. Back in the old days, the ancient Greeks used to think, they used to think the sun goes around the earth rather than the earth going around the sun. But any way you look at it, something has to keep the earth moving, or the sun moving if you're an ancient Greek. So what keeps it moving? They thought, well, it must be God, because if I push a little block across the table, it'll soon slow down. So they thought, well, why doesn't the earth slow down? It's just going around the sun. Or as they used to think, the sun's going around the earth. Why isn't it stopping? Why isn't it slowing down? So it must need a continuous force. That force must come from God. But then we realize the reason that something on the table slows down is because of friction. And friction doesn't apply to the earth going around the sun, because there's no air in space and there's nothing to slow the earth down. So it just keeps going on its merry way for billions of years. So we can explain a lot without God. I suppose you could argue that you don't need to have a God pushing the earth around the sun to keep it going, because we know that something will keep going regardless forever unless a force acts on it, which is Newton's first law. So the earth just keeps going around and around and around. But that doesn't mean that God didn't have a hand in the universe. What I'm sort of sometimes worried about is how exactly God created the universe. I don't feel confident enough to say, I don't think anyone really can, to say this is how God did it. God did this and then God did that, and God still needs to do this but doesn't need to do that. Because we don't need God, I suppose, in a sense, to keep the earth going around the sun, because we know about gravity. But did God create gravity? Again, I don't know, because at what point do you kind of stop? But I just think the beauty of the world, the fact that we're here, points to the existence of God. There's this famous kind of analogy called the watchmaker analogy, where if you're going on a bushwalk in a forest and you find someone's watch ticking away there, and you pick that up, you would automatically assume that someone made it, because how does a watch just can't make itself, it can't come into existence by itself, so you assume the existence of a watchmaker. And most people still have this notion that if you see a living human being or an insect or a lion or whatever, then somehow God's been involved in the creation of that creature. Some people say, well, no, because now we've got nature. Nature explains it all. The fact that the Big Bang happened and then evolution took place and atoms chemically reacted together to form proteins and whatever else, and then DNA came along, whatever. Our explanations of that are not all that satisfactory in terms of the formation of life. But however God made it, I suppose maybe it does come down to faith a little bit. I believe that everything points to God as the creator, even if nature has been set on its own course. Science, I suppose, is the study, not necessarily of how God created, but just what creation God has made. That's what I think. So I think everything points to the nature of God, but most scientists would believe that whether God created it or not, we can find nature, we can find the patterns in nature, we can find how science works and how the universe works, and there's probably room for not invoking God every time. Oh, God did this, God did that, because God may have created a universe that does run by itself, and that would be no less fantastic.
All right. Over our entire existence, humans have been able to identify and calculate the function and pattern of the universe, from the orbit of the planets to the microscopic arrangement of our DNA. Does all this order and objective reality in the universe occur naturally, or is it the will of God?
It's hard to say, again, what is the will of God and what is natural. I believe that God created a universe that runs on its own according to set laws. God can choose to come into the universe and change certain laws whenever God wants to, but generally it runs on its own, but it runs in a way that has allowed for our existence. So, for example, if gravity was ever so slightly stronger or weaker, then stars would not form the way they do now, and the Earth wouldn't have formed the way it did now, and therefore we couldn't exist on a planet. So stars would either just collapse in on themselves if gravity was stronger, and therefore there wouldn't be much light and heat coming from our sun, for example, or the Earth, when the solar system formed, the Earth wouldn't come together the way it did. So again, we wouldn't be here. So there's all these amazing not coincidences, just amazing things that are so finely tuned that if anything was slightly different, we wouldn't be here. Another thing is, if the Earth was ever so slightly closer to the sun or slightly further away from the sun, again, no life on Earth would be possible. The oceans would boil off if it was slightly closer to the sun, even like 1 or 2% kind of thing. And if we're slightly further away from the sun, everything would just freeze over. So again, the Earth has to be right here in this orbital radius around the sun for us to exist. Does that point to the existence of God, or does that have anything to do with Christianity? Hard to say, But it doesn't necessarily tell us that God is directly telling nature what to do, but certainly God has created nature. So it's hard to talk about what the will of God is when it comes to, and or whether it's the will of God or whether it's nature, because they're kind of intertwined. God has created nature, but nature follows the rules that God created. So, and they're all finely tuned rules. Even the tilt of the earth right now is about 23.5 degrees. So we get summer and winter. If it was slightly off, if it was slightly more or slightly less, if it was only a 22 degree tilt, then that would affect the seasons and all life on earth might not survive. If the tilt was greater, then you would have longer and hotter summers and colder and darker winters. So everything would sort of freeze over or boil off on different sides of the planet. You'd lose all your water, and then life would come, as we know, just wouldn't be possible. So all these little things happen. I reckon God's involved, but I don't know how, because I can't even begin to think how God thinks or creates. That's kind of beyond my brain capacity.
All right, thank you, Spiro. This is the last question now, concluding question. How do mathematics and science assist us to encounter God and glorify Him?
I think we live in a beautiful, beautiful universe, and when we see the beauty of nature, of just stars and galaxies that they've managed to take photos of with all these telescopes, the one being the James Webb telescope that points its cameras out into this little tiny speck of sky that they reckon was kind of the size of a grain of sand held at arm's length. So there's this tiny little speck of sand there, and they've taken this photo for like 10 hours or whatever, long exposure shot, and in that photo they've captured, I don't even know the exact number, like 100 or 200 galaxies, each filled with billions of stars. You just think it's incredible, and you just think what an awesome universe that we live in. We see that when then we see how the human body works, or other any living creature really. In our case, we've got a heart, brain, kidneys do all these things, our liver does all these things. When you see all these things, you just can't help but praise God, and we can't even begin to think just the awesome power, the awesome ability, or the nature of God is really beyond our comprehension, because the creation is beyond our comprehension. Although we're learning more and more about it as we go along, but it's so beyond our comprehension. So God must be even more beyond our comprehension. I think every new discovery that we make using science and mathematics just brings out God's magnificence to us and makes it more real every time. So I'm all for science. We should keep studying the natural world, how our bodies work, medicines, technology, astronomy. We should keep going, and I'm sure that it's better for us, even if you don't believe in God, but for Christians, it just brings out God's magnificence all the more.
All right. Thank you so much, Spiro, for your time.
No, it's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Spiro.